This is Darker Days Radio. I am one of your hosts, Mike, and tonight I'm joined by Chris. How's it going, Chris?
Hey, yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, I've got a. What have I been doing? Role playing, painting miniatures, and getting ready for a overdue trip back to the UK for a bit of a holiday. So yeah, pretty good. Oh, also, I'm not sweating my ass off with the German weather. I don't understand. Yeah, so yeah, pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. There's lots of books I still need to read that have been coming out recently. So yeah, cool. What have you been up to gaming wise?
Gaming-wise, I was actually playing some video games a little bit. The new Shadowrun Returns came out, and that was pretty cool.
Ah.
Yeah, a bit of a CRPG, I guess. Mostly, there is like dialogue options, but there's definitely combat you have to go through. And I, of course, made a street samurai and just mowed people down.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've played a bit more of. Finally, got my ass into gear and playing a bit more of Assassin's Creed 3 because it's obviously good inspiration building, kind of the looks and the weaponry and so forth for Iron Kingdom. So yeah, it's a good game. It's good fun and lots of black powder weaponry and cool ways to assassinate people. So yeah, I've been playing playing some computer games. Yeah. Wow, there's still loads of stuff that's happened since we last recorded Darker Days for the main show. So what are we up to with the show tonight then, Mike? What is our plan?
Well, this is episode number 49, and it is the final episode of season 4. I think it's a fitting number to end on. And we're going to be discussing, of course, Wraith the Oblivion, talking a little bit about the Shadowlands, presenting a secret frequency regarding Hart's Island in New York State, and also discussing the new World of Darkness, Underworld.
Oh yes, yeah. There's quite a lot to discuss there, and yeah, it's gonna be interesting how the two things, how the Underworld and the Shadowlands of Wraith the Oblivion and classic World of Darkness compares to New World of Darkness approach to the same sort of setting material. Yeah, it'd be interesting what crosses over and what could be used from one into the other. So I think that moves us on to White Wolf News, doesn't it?
I think it does. All right, Chris. Changing Breeds. How'd that do?
It got funded. I read in the notes it got $114,000. Quite a few bonus PDFs are coming with that one. So for the beast cults of the Hayonkai, so that's the Eastern Asia beast kin. The Ahadi, I don't even know what those are, to be honest. That's how much I
They're
paid.
North Africa.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And what? Changing Breeds fiction anthology. Interesting.
Yeah, the fiction anthology is pretty cool because the way they set it up with the Kickstarter was every stretch goal was just one chapter, one short story for the anthology. So you actually built up the anthology as you went.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Nice, nice, nice. What else we got out? We've got the things that have been released recently. We've got Convention Book Syndicate. I've yet to have a look at the review copy of that. I'm still actually got to finish the Progenitors one. So I think I'll make sure I read both of those before we record the next Darker Days, because then I think we can have more time to talk about them.
Indeed.
Strix Murder Anthology, I've started reading, but I got distracted by some other novels. So I might try and read some on the while I'm in Manchester, because obviously that's going to give us a good heads up of really kind of things we can expect to see in the main setting Chronicle book. And then, of course, we've had Hunters Hunted 2. Have you had a look at that one?
A little bit, and I gotta say, Justin Achilli did it again. Once again, he developed a book which I thought would be like pretty mediocre, not too interesting, retreading old ground, and it comes out and it's phenomenal. So well done on his part, and of course to all the writers as well.
Cool. And keeping on the theme of vampires, we've had more a lot more previews of material for the Strix Chronicles. So that's again more stuff with the Covenants and just a cursory glance of how the rules are lining up. The main core rules of Strix Chronicles line up with God Machine Chronicles. So the whole point is that, from what I believe we were told last time by maybe David Hill or something, is that you could buy the Strix Chronicles setting book, and you wouldn't actually need the God Machine Chronicles to run it. A lot of the basic World of Darkness material is duplicated in there. Obviously, it may not go into it as deep explanations or examples, but it is all there, so you don't have to have two books open at once. You just need that one, and if you need more specifics, you can go to God Machine Chronicle. And of course, with the God Machine Chronicle rules, remember the God Machine Chronicle rules were given away for free in the PDF. So even then, you can still get all those bits for free. So the only thing you're missing is the God Machine Chronicle setting material, which of course you don't need if you're running Vampire. So hurrah, that's all good.
And a lot of the new rules for Vampire are actually in the Reap the Whirlwind supplement. So
oh yes,
you can check them out right there.
Yeah, that's actually I think Rose Bailey pretty much said you could essentially run a lot of World of Darkness just with that.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had the unfortunate news that Mummy the Curse has been delayed yet again, though this is all completely out of the hands of Rich Thomas and the guys at Onyx Path Publishing. Basically the quality assurance of the printers fouled up monumentally, and so just before the books were all ready to ship, Rich went, "Where's the embossed cover?"
Mm-hmm.
So they've all gone back to have all their covers put back on again with the embossing. So we'll get it eventually. At least we've got the PDFs, and I'll be happy once I get it. It might get me into the mood to actually run a one-shot for it at some point. So yeah, stay tuned for that one. But it is on its way. What else have we learnt recently from Onyx Path Publishing and World of Darkness? Ooh, Demon.
Yeah.
Demon has a name.
Demon the Descent. I don't think we've actually ever said or spoken its true name on the show before, so there you go, Demon the Descent. Matt McFarland is, of course, continuing his actual play, and little bits and pieces of information are coming out here and there. And actually, we did ask Rose Bailey and Matt McFarland something about the demons in Demon the Descent, which we'll be discussing later on in the show, I think.
Mm-hmm. What's the last bit of news that we have here? We have the red list for Vampire 20. So that's currently in development, or that's being written by...
That is correct, yep.
Matt McElroy. So cool. That's the red list is basically like the modern, up-to-date version of kind of like Vampire. What was it? Most Wanted, was it? Is that correct?
Yeah, Kindred Most Wanted. Yeah. You're right. It's going to be interesting because it's going to have, as Matt mentioned when he was last on the show, it's going to have material for running Alistair campaigns, and those are the guys that hunt the Most Wanted. They're kind of like the I don't know, special FBI guys for the Camarilla. So it's going to be some pretty interesting new story ideas.
Okay, cool. And that brings us on to then any specific things with regard to Darker Days itself. What have we got for Darker Days news? I guess everyone should be aware that we've changed the logo and changed the web page, so it's had a refresh. I think it looks a lot brighter, maybe a bit easier to read. I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
Definitely. I was actually considering that, some people go to university for 4 years for graphic design and they're not very good. And you just cranked something out in a couple hours? Like you learned everything and it's looking pretty solid.
I just basically bodged around with with Photoshop. And yeah, it looks cool. And I have that logo on some business cards ready for Essen Spiel for the gaming convention. That's coming up in end of September, October, which is good because that generally means more cheap War Machines and Hordes figures, maybe, or something else. Or no, to be honest, I'll have enough figures by then. I think I'll be scouting for like scenery pieces and odds and ends like that. Um, Unless I come back with some giant colossal or something, that would be dumb. Um,
Hmm.
anyway, which brings on to the fact, obviously, the last Darker Days Darkling we had was our Dark Iron special with Simon Berman, which was great because we covered, I guess, some similar topics to like what we were gonna start talking about, which is like, we covered horror in the Iron Kingdom setting, and how souls work into that, and how you get that horror kind of horror story into a fantasy setting. It was
Hmm.
quite a highbrow storytelling kind of episode to do.
It was.
Um, and on that note, I believe we have what 8 hours to go on the War Machine Tactics Kickstarter there, and they're very close to hitting the next stretch goal that unlocks the Retribution of Syra for the computer game. So,
We're not going to make it to Ashland, are we?
no. And
Balls.
yeah, it would have been cool because obviously they're the mercenary force that fight for Lael, or what was Lael. And I've read two of the novellas for the Iron Kingdom setting. They're really great, actually. They have a lot of good, they're nothing special to read in the sense of like highbrow writing, but there's enough in there to get you into the setting and make you feel immersed in what the setting is. And so I'm reading the next one, which is in Thunder Forged, which will be followed up in the next month or so by Big Iron, which is the next one in that trilogy written by Mr. C.A. Suleiman, a certain writer and developer of Mummy. So
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Um, Obviously, we've got some videos online, and I've been looking into a way of working out how to get our audio podcasts onto YouTube. So look out for that if you go on YouTube. We're going to have some nice visuals just to act as a bit of a background while you listen to pretty much all the old shows and everything recent and everything coming up. We'll just put on YouTube as well so more people can join the community. Um, what else have we had? Have we had a good mailbag for Darker Days?
Well, we've definitely been asking people for their suggestions for next season, and it looks like we've definitely gotten some suggestions. Eleanor and Bastion Roars mentioned that they'd like to see some more content for Kindred of the East and Mage the Sorcerer's Crusade, and even maybe some extra discussion of Unhallowed Metropolis. And definitely the latter two of those we can totally discuss. Kindred of the East might be a little tough, but we might have another host join the show, and maybe he knows something.
Ooh. Another host, you say? So who is this person that's going to be infected by the worm? Um,
Uh, do we mention him right now? I mean,
or should we leave
nothing's
it a
nothing's
surprise?
finalized. We just
Nothing's
tantalize
finalized.
people.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it there. Yeah, it'd be cool to talk about those games. I think we've still got a few Darkling series to finish off. We still need to do. We've got a Darkling I still have written up, which is how to do Vampire the Requiem set in the Dark Ages. So that follows on. That's kind of like the last piece to the Dark Ages series that Steve and Adrian did. So I've been dying to record that one and go through that.
Hmm.
And also, going back to the Iron Kingdoms thing, what with the new book coming out for that one, which is we keep calling it God, Kings, and Nations. I think it's Kings, Nations, and Gods, whichever way around you want to put it. But we should be looking to get their a lore master, I think is the easiest way to describe him, Doug Seacat on the show, so we can talk about more specifics on that setting. So that'd be really cool. Um, What else have we got coming up? Any hangout games planned for the future?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be running that vampire game. I did the first first session and then got kind of busy, but yeah, we'll be picking that up probably in September. So shout out to Alex, James, and Chig.
Hmm. And the other thing I'm still rolling around in my head is, do I run a Geist uh, one shot, or at least infrequent game? Because I kind of want to run Geist.
The answer is yes.
Yes. I think that happened after going through the Book of the Dead and everything to prepare for this show. Um, I guess is that a good point to move on to our first main segment?
Yeah, let's go talk about the classic World of Darkness.
Classic World of Darkness.
All right, Chris, it's the end of the season, so let's talk about death. Let's talk about Wraith the Oblivion. It's kind of our tradition, and I know that you're not a diehard classic World of Darkness player, but you do have a little bit of experience with Wraith, don't you?
I've played a few sessions of a Wraith the Great War setting, which is particularly dark. So, I'm kind of aware of, some of the basics of the setting, and like, you have the guilds and I want to say Numina, but is that the right term for their power? Arcanoi. Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
There's so many different names for these things. Yeah, so I would say I'm fairly familiar, and also like there's enough about the setting which obviously turns up in like Mage or in Vampire the Masquerade, with relation to obviously mages go into the Umbra and they go to the Underworld, and obviously the vampires had some stuff going on with a certain city of Enoch, so I'm aware of enough to talk about it.
Fair enough. And that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on. So, back in Dark Days Radio, episode number 22, Mark and I went through all of the classic World of Darkness games and talked about, kind of the basic structure of the game, a little bit about their settings, but it's really just a broad, rapid-fire overview. And I kind of want to go back, especially for Wraith, and discuss some of the finer or more complex elements. And Chris, as you know, Wraith it's kind of a unique game amongst all of the World of Darkness games, because it's the only one that is not set in the real world. The generic or default setting is actually the Shadowlands, which is a sort of an otherworld, a spirit world that exists, and the ghosts there, the wraiths, cannot interact easily with the Skinlands or the mortal world. So while, say, werewolf or mage, there's the ability to go into the Umbra, that's not really the default setting. They're really supposed to be set on Earth primarily. And Wraith is a lot different because, of course, you have this completely other world to begin with and explore. Now, in Wraith First Edition, this entire setting, this entire geography, is only really explained in about 5 pages, which has a lot of sidebars and a lot of artwork. So there's not actually that much content to go along with. So I figured we'd kind of do a basic overview and see if we can kind of explain these things and also, give some extra ideas for how they might be portrayed. Of course, later Wraith books do go into more detail and explain, at least give more structure and suggestions for these different places. But I thought it would be kind of interesting to just start off with the real basic descriptions that we got way back in 1994 and see what we can do with them.
Cool.
Yeah, the Shadowlands, or the world of Wraith, is a little strange. It actually, in the book, kind of describes itself as this sort of metaphysical onion, which actually does seem to be kind of fitting. So, when a Wraith is just standing there in the Shadowlands, they can actually see the real world, the world of the living, which is called the Skinlands. But they cannot interact with it because of this sort of element called the Shroud, which separates them. The Shroud wasn't always there, and in fact, there's mention in the source book Necropolis Atlanta that even in the years before colonists came over, the Native Americans could still interact with the dead a fair bit more easily. But the Shroud is there, and it makes it quite difficult for Wraiths to use their Arcanoi and other abilities to interact with the regular world. Now, they're standing on this physical surface, this kind of crust of the Shadowlands, and it seems to be that beneath that crust, in this sort of like hollow earth, is the Tempest. And the reason why I say it's kind of inside is because there's these elements called nihils, which are vortices and almost like kind of quicksand pits, which of like oblivion material, which leads down into this thing called the Tempest. The Tempest is, of course, this kind of it's a very entropic realm, I'd say, where it's chaotic and it's very easy for wraiths to get lost. But within this Tempest is also a few safe shores, safe harbors, such as the Far Shores, which are these heavens and hells. And there's also this giant city for the Kingdom of Iron called Stygia, which is really the capital and center place of commerce for the hierarchy, which is in many ways kind of the big bad guy of the setting. They really oppress everyone in this land of the dead. So, how can we use the Shadowlands, and how can we really describe it? I think with regard to the actual Shadowlands, it's supposed to be a very gloomy place. Everything's supposed to feel dead. And you need to enforce that fairly often. Talk about how maybe the land itself is this thick, like ashen crust, for example. Or, talk about how the structures, because they're still buildings that mirror those in the real world, but they're decaying, they're rotting. And they really just have this this aged look. And you should definitely check out like photographs or other really just photographs, I guess, or films exploring, maybe like urban explorer films that check out these kind of old buildings, that kind of stuff, to give you ideas for how to describe them.
I was going to say, with the Shadowlands, do you also get the entropic reflection? Because that's essentially what it kind of is. Do you get an entropic reflection of buildings that have been long gone from the material world?
Yes, that does happen. Yeah, that's actually a very interesting thing to bring up, that you might find this ancient building, which no longer exists because it was torn down, say, 5 years ago, but there's still a reflection of it because people still kind of remember it. Much like how the wraiths themselves can be kept alive by the memories of others. So that's a very good point. But I think it's also important to bring up that you don't want to keep talking about, the decay, the death, and just the general dreariness of the setting, because it gets very monotonous that way. So definitely throw in these like little aspects of beauty, maybe a ray of light shining down at the bubbling creek, or mist dancing in the cemetery. Just these very small things to kind of pique the player's interest and just break it up a little bit.
Would you say that when a wraith looks over into the material world, or tries to then interact with the material world, that's almost like, say they're looking at or within a portion of the Shadowland, would it be safe to say that that portion of the Shadowland suddenly takes on, or what they look at, that portion of the Shadowland, it takes on color and more of a semblance that's akin to what's in the real world? I'm kind of like, it's almost like kind of comparing, say, if you've got a black and white photo, and then you suddenly allow more color, you're allowing more color to come through in one part of a photo. Would you say that's maybe a good analogy to kind of like to give an idea of how race live in their world and then look into the mortal material realm?
I think that's actually a wonderful idea. Now, especially, you could use it for this one aspect, this one mechanic in Wraith, which when a Wraith needs to gather pathos, they have to find someone or something emitting a particular emotion, which they feed off of.
So color comes in, yeah.
Yeah, that's when the color comes in as they gather pathos in that way.
So you could use the color and tie it to what is it? The colors of auras that are generally in like all the mind reading kind of like all specs and the equivalent powers. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a really good idea. I like that quite a bit. Now, of course, there's also the Tempest, and this is where things get really strange with Wraith, because it's not very well explained, and of course, I mentioned it's entropy itself, so it's going to be ever-changing and chaotic. The Tempest does have these kind of more stable areas, which are called byways, or one of the most important is like the River Styx, where the ferrymen will escort people around. And this portraying the Tempest, you can do it in a couple ways. I've seen people describe it as just like kind of a stormy river, that sort of thing, which I think is fine for maybe the byways and that kind of thing. But once you get off more distant away from those into the center of it, I think you need to get a little bit more creative. So one image that I really want to kind of draw back on is, and I hate to reference another piece of media, but the hyperspace in Babylon 5, which is this... you should check it out on YouTube first off. Just search like Babylon 5 hyperspace or something, and that'll probably be the easiest way to see what it looks like. But it's imagine a kind of a stormy, cloudy realm where there's no gravity really, so you're just floating around, and there's kind of ever-changing shades of gray, and then you occasionally see little bolts of lightning or energy bursting off in the distance. And so it's going to be extremely hard for a Wraith to navigate, and in fact, to navigate in the Tempest and not be drawn into any like ebbies or gravity wells, you in fact need a specific Arcanoi.
It sounds very similar, because when you said Babylon 5, that's the very... I can't remember where that term comes from. It comes from a certain fantasy or sci-fi setting, but it's the typical the dark wine red space or sea is a way of describing like the alternate reality of space in whatever thing that was. And when you describe the Tempest, I think another good way of another source of inspiration is maybe of all things the description of the warp in Games Workshop's Warhammer 40,000 setting, because again that's a psychoactive alternate reality which is ocean-like, with a miasma of colors, but also with a whole mix of flows and tides and ebbs and vortices and different densities even.
Yes, and I think that actually talking about the warp brings us to kind of my next point or next idea, is that you could actually just make it this almost psychological manifestation, like this dreamlike experience, and simply kind of model it after dream sequences you've seen in shows, like maybe an Angel or Babylon 5 had its own dream sequence or kind of vision, where you make it a somewhat stable environment where maybe the character's in like an apartment or something, and they're walking around and talking, interacting with someone or something. But then the setting quite dramatically and quite suddenly changes, and you might not even really hint the player to it. You might just have this, let's say they're in the apartment talking to a specter, and then quite suddenly an armored knight walks in and begins discussing something with them. And then before they know it, they're standing in some open field rather than an apartment. Using that can kind of unsettle the players and also kind of reinforce the chaos of the situation that they're in.
The other idea I was thinking, another visual that maybe makes a lot more sense with where the Shadowlands, blend into the Tempest, is the depiction of hell in the film Constantine, with that where the buildings everything's reflected from the real world, and they're all this decayed, destroyed reflection of physical objects, and there's this you could almost say like a searing wind which is constantly blowing and tearing at the buildings and all the physical objects and turning them slowly to ash and pulling ash away from them. So that maybe also works as an idea of how, the one realm, one part of the underworld of the Shadowlands blends into the Tempest.
Very interesting. Yeah, that could definitely work. Then, of course, a few other safe shores or safe harbors in the Tempest are the Far Shores, which are a collection of heavens and hells within the Tempest. And
Okay.
for portraying these, you've got quite a few options. You could just make it this almost stable object within the Tempest. So, playing off of that or riffing off of the sort of Babylon 5 hyperspace idea, you just have this solid slab of perhaps the ashen crust of the Shadowlands itself, just floating there, and that's where these people are hanging out. Or you could actually make it, if it's along one of the byways, it's just a simple island or a delta at the end of a major river.
Or, I mean, I'm trying to take some examples from some other things. It could be some really weird, like, inverted architecture. So, like, say, the inside of a church, but turned with, like, vaulted ceilings, but turn it upside down. So the floor's obviously the bowl shape of the archway. And that idea comes from the Robin Williams film What Dreams May Come, which again is like an afterlife scenario where his character has died and goes to rescue his wife who committed suicide from essentially purgatory. Trying to think of some other depictions of Farshals. Also, I kind of like the visuals too. Was from the Kickstarter that had gone a while ago, and which our infrequent co-host James. He got the Kingdom Death monster.
Oh,
And
that's a good idea. Well, I
yeah,
mean, that's another World of the Dead that you could riff
Yes.
off of.
And the floor, like it's always depicted that the ground, the floor, is covered in this mosaic of carved faces, and if those are all just kind of like the dead that are so long forgotten that they've kind of what's the term I'm looking for? It's almost like a kind of like the an ossuary, but within in the underworld itself. They've just become so rigid and stagnant that that all these dead have kind of collected together to form a solid block of floating ectoplasm, I guess is the only way to describe it, which has become this dark basalt. That would kind of work.
Isn't that supposed to become an RPG at some point?
Yes, I believe it will do.
Oh my god.
I know.
Oh, if only the artwork were.
Well, we'll see,
Nicer.
because James is going to do an unboxing when he gets hold of it, which is not a few months off now. He'll be doing a video unboxing for us.
Okay, sounds good.
So yeah, there might be some cool monsters for ideas of specters or so forth. Anyway, continuing on with other things. The other thing that so these Farshals and other things, and going back to the Tempest. So with the Tempest, you said there's these byways, and I've just gone to my PDF copy of Wraith, and I read that some of these byways are named after certain rivers of death. So, for example, one of them is always like the River Styx, or they call another one after another one of the rivers of death from Greek mythology. So again, some of these Farshals also reflect certain depictions of the underworld from certain religions and faiths of the world.
Yes, definitely. And if you're gonna do that, definitely go for the more bizarre and twisted. Of course, the mention of the upside down citadel is a very good one. So kind of riff off of that. Just make it similar to a religion or a mythology that is well known, but change a few little things. Maybe mess around with what's I can't even remember the name of hell in Viking mythology. Muspelheim, is that it?
No, hell is
Niflheim.
Niflheim. Muspelheim is the land of fire.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is even deeper. I think that's almost the equivalent of like Oblivion almost. Other realms of the dead you can riff off. Xibalba in Mayan. Is that Mayan or is it Aztec? Anyway, it's referenced a lot in the film The Fountain, which is very interesting and potentially for ideas. Other realms of the dead. Let's think. Trying to think.
The underworld of Egyptian mythology,
Obviously,
which is obviously used in Mummy the Curse, but
and is obviously used in Mummy the Resurrection. So obviously, it's
yeah,
the dark kingdom of, is it Ivory?
of sand, Dark
Of
Kingdom of Sand.
sand. Obviously, the underworld of the Aztec lands was the dark land of obsidian. But if I'm right from what I know of Wraith and the setting, did that not get destroyed by an invasion by the Dark Kingdom of Stygia, which is the Dark Kingdom of Iron? Because obviously that represents the colonization of the Americas by the West, by people from Europe. You've also got the Dark Kingdom of Jade, so that's obviously the underworld relating to Far East Asia, kind of so Shinto and Buddhism and so forth, all mixed together. And I guess you can have the remnants of other kingdoms of the dead from any other kind of pagan belief or other areas. I'm sure there's something that relates to kind of to like the Australia and kind of the Pacific Islands that way. I guess there's something you could do. Or India would have the because it's 1,000 gods again, 1,000 hells. Because I'm right in because that's quite interesting because that relates to Kindred of the East, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, actually, Kindred of the East, it's interesting to mention that there's a Wraith source book called The Risen, and that came out in like 96 or something. And that deals with wraiths that come back and inhabit their body, or actually, I think it could be someone else's body. But it's very difficult to do, and there's only a few active ones at any particular time. But then the later Kindred of the East source book actually flat out says in the first chapter or the introduction that the Kindred of the East are actually just the same thing as the Wraith Risen, but they have slightly different powers and a slightly different like political setup and all that.
Yeah.
So yes, it relates quite closely.
Cool. And then, so where should we go on with this? So obviously we've spoken about some of the far shores and these nigh hills, and obviously places within the Tempest which are safe to stay, to rest, or even live. When I say live, that's kind of a oxymoron in its own kind of way. What else is within the lands of the dead then in Wraith?
I think we actually covered all of it.
Have we covered all of
it?
At
least a very high level.
Oh well, the other thing I'm just looking through. Obviously, one thing we've not spoken about is that what's at the heart of the Tempest is Oblivion
itself. Yes.
Yeah, and I think this is all kind of interesting because the one thing that this all relates to quite well is actually the depictions of the underworld in of all games, Exalted. Because remember, back in the day, Exalted was kind of sort of as the world of darkness before the modern times, before the fall, before the sundering, before whatever. And again, I think its depiction of the underworld is quite interesting because you've got different kingdoms controlled by different death lords, and so they take on their own kind of form. And you also get some interesting kind of geography when you start talking about where the Death Lords are as I say they're these monumentally powerful beings that rule over entire kingdoms of the dead, but they themselves are servants to even greater beings who are like dead primordial gods called the Neverborn, and they exist in the very heart of the underworld. and to get there, you have to, you know, go into these deep channels, and they're like warrens where, you know, even darker ghosts and specters exist. So again, you've got the idea that the other type of depiction, maybe the Tempest, could be a maddening maze of tunnels, which, you know, is constantly shifting and changing, with very few caverns which remain, you know, normal.
That is pretty sweet too.
Then, is there anything we should say about maelstroms? Because obviously that's kind of an important thing to classic World of Darkness.
Yeah, I mean, a maelstrom is basically a storm across the Shadowlands. It's really the Tempest itself coming out of the shell and causing damaging winds and putrid smells, and really clearing out areas of the Shadowlands and storming through cities. And usually kind of heralds a natural disaster or some dark event that's about to come. And there are, of course, the Great Maelstroms, which pretty much just cover the entire Shadowlands itself. The kind of endgame scenario for Wraith is the coming of the next, I think it's the 6th Great Maelstrom.
And that essentially tears the entire Underworld apart.
Indeed.
Okay. Is there anything you can briefly say about one of these kingdoms in the Underworld? So, like Stygia, like what's particular about Stygia?
Okay, sure. So Stygia has, of course, it's sort of the Western kingdom, and it's controlled, of course, by Charon, who is like the Great Dark Lord, started the Ferrymen, and has been ruling for a long time. Of course, he's recently gone missing, which causes some political upheaval in the Wraith setting. And the people that stand to most capitalize on this political upheaval are the different Death Lords, like the Smiling Lord and the Lady of Fate, for example. Organized around these monumental figures is the entire hierarchy, which is kind of it's a very bureaucratic, large organization, somewhat modeled after the Roman Empire. For example, the soldiers of it are called legionnaires. And it's a kind of archaic society. Slavery still exists. And, of course, the economy of Stygia, and really of all the Shadowlands and the Wraith setting, is fueled primarily on the souls of others. So the soul of a Wraith that's newly born, he might be captured when he's still in kind of infant state, and grabbed and just thrown into a soul forge and then turned into an ashtray or something.
Yeah. Cool.
Good.
I would say, I mean, obviously, I think for New World of Darkness, there's plenty, obviously, within Wraith to plunder. I would say a lot of what's in the books can be used as particular descriptions of domains, which turn up in Geist the Sin Eater and obviously New World of Darkness Underworld. And, you know, in a bit we'll talk about what I mean by a domain and how, if anything, the classic World of Darkness Underworld is actually quite a very different beast to the New World of Darkness Underworld.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason for that is because since it's the default setting for Wraith, they had to make the Shadowlands something tangible and stable rather than being so chaotic and unknown like the Underworld of the New World of Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of influenced the overall design of it.
Yes. Cool. Well, I think that brings us to the secret frequency then.
Yes, it does. And I'm going to take a sip of water.
It's under the stairs. I want my mom.
So tonight we present to you Hart's Island. It's a disturbing locale in the Long Island Sound, only a few miles off the shore of New York City. Little of the island's early history is known. The 130-acre island was purchased by Thomas Pell from the natives in 1654. In February 1869, New York City purchased the island from Edward Hunter of the Bronx for a sum of $75,000. Just before the island was purchased by New York City, it served as a prisoner of war camp during the American Civil War. Nearly 3,500 Confederate soldiers were imprisoned there, and 235 died at the camp in only 4 months. They were buried alongside Union soldiers. The misery of Hart Island didn't end there. After purchasing the island, New York City designated the northern 101 acres, nearly 80% of the small island, to be the city's Potter's Field. A Potter's Field is a public graveyard where the poor and orphaned are buried in mass graves. Unknown corpses are buried in individual plots where they could be disinterred again, and stillborn infants are buried in trenches of 1,000 mismatched coffins. As of this day, over 850,000 dead are buried in the Potter's Field. Perhaps more disturbing is that people continued to reside on Hart's Island as the graveyard grew. In 1870, New York City used the island as a quarantine during the yellow fever epidemic, with many of the ill joining the Potter's Field. In 1885, the Pavilion was built, a women's insane asylum located on the island's south shore. Civil War structures falling into disrepair were frequently co-opted as temporary prisons for the Department of Corrections up until the mid-20th century. During the Cold War, Hart's Island housed Nike Ajax missile silos on the northern shore to shoot down incoming long-range bombers. These facilities were only operational from 1956 to 1961, but construction records detail complex structures and a generator powerful enough to provide electricity for a town of 10,000 souls. Hart's Island no longer has any permanent residents. The pavilion was eventually closed down, and the Phoenix House Drug Rehabilitation Center shut down in 1975. But through all this, the dead kept pouring into the Potter's Field. Corpses are buried by inmates from Rikers Island, paid only 50 cents per hour, who arrive on the one lonely ferry that travels there, along with those they need to bury. The Potter's Field is now also used to dispose of amputated body parts, which are placed in boxes labeled limbs. Burial ceremonies are no longer conducted for the dead since the 1950s, and no individual grave markers have been set, except one. The first child to die of AIDS in New York City was buried in isolation, marked with a concrete slab that read SC-B1, 1985. Visitors are rarely allowed on Hart's Island, and the press are never granted access. Only one guided tour has ever been provided by the Department of Corrections, allowing local residents to see the exterior of the silos and crumbling buildings, but enter none of them. Those family members who travel to Hart's Island are not allowed beyond the northern gazebo and can never see the graves. So, what can we do with Hart's Island in the world of darkness? It's the dumping ground of corpses for the largest city in the United States, so we shouldn't be strapped for ideas, should we?
Yeah, this should be quite easy to go through some ideas.
Definitely. So, one story hook for any World of Darkness game is the connection between the burial ground and the military. Why put the silos in such an inaccessible place, away from the main Air Force base? Also note that the city stopped providing burial rites about the same time that the silos were constructed. Perhaps the military was put there for more than just defense from the Soviets. What if you play as military chaplains, ensuring that the dead stay dead? In Vampire the Requiem, Hart's Island provides an excellent locale for a cabal of Ordo Dracul vampires. The kindred are free to experiment on themselves, the bodies, and the few inmates that come to visit. And what about those inmates? Spending your waking hours only with dead bodies, and the other imprisoned can take its psychological toll. What sort of beliefs might they turn to, and how can they keep their sanity? Perhaps a voodoo cult springs up amongst the prisoners of Rikers Island. And given the topic of tonight's show, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention how Hart's Island might be portrayed in the Shadowlands. With so many fetters and corpses in one place, surely the local hierarchy has fortified the island, and may actually be charging a protection fee to ensure that a Wraith's bones are safe. And if you can't pay the oboli, they might break a couple femurs. So, Chris, do you have any ideas? And please don't say it's an Avernian Gate, because I think we got that.
Yeah, that's pretty obvious. It's definitely a Avernian Gate. The other things that you can look at, obviously, for Werewolf the Forsaken, there's a few options. Obviously, in the Hissel, it could be a wound or a particularly dark part of the shadow, and so obviously it's a prime hunting ground for particular spirits, and there has to be a cull every so often because it just keeps breeding these nefarious spirit beings of death and destruction. You can then understand that possibly the island acts as part of the territory for a pack of bone shadows, who obviously use the gateways into the underworld there to go and retrieve and gain more powers from ghostly allies, powers which are quite different from those that they would gain from not from just typical spirits. The other thing you could possibly use is, let's think, Promethean. Obviously, the island is possibly a perfect place for a Promethean of any sort to exist, since they're the corruption they cause, the disquiet, will really have very little effect on those around them, since they're all dead. I'm trying to think of all the games. You could potentially use the location with. I'm trying to think which group is it. Is it the which Mike in Hunter the Vigil? Which group is it that makes use of various supernatural creatures' abilities? Is it the Demonifuge? No,
more demonic stuff. I mean, the Chiron group has their own kind of experiments going on.
So obviously you can fit in the idea that they've been doing experiments, and it's a perfect place to dispose of the bodies. The other thing is, maybe it's a perfect island and place of operation for Orpheus group.
Yeah.
There's maybe quite a few people that can recruit into their ranks from the dead that are interred there.
Absolutely. And maybe they're using that generator to power their sleeper agents that go under.
If you really want to go crazy, maybe there's a Nefandi ex-Euthanatos Nefandi mage for Mage the Ascension, who operates from there, harvesting the entropic energy for his own use, so that he can eventually bring all of New York into his control and turn it into a land of the dead. Obviously, there's obvious relations between this. You can see some parallels between this island and other islands of the dead, like Paveglia of Venice. So maybe there are certain byways and tunnels through the Underworld or the Shadowlands that takes you from one of these islands of the dead to another. Maybe the spiritual reflection of them is actually these stable areas within the Tempest. So yeah, maybe its shadowy reflection is the fact that it is it's a landmass that has just loads and loads of carved bones all the way across its field. Maybe its other shadowy reflection is a domain in the underworld of Geist and Eaters. Maybe even I'm just trying to think. Maybe even you could use it as a place of operation for Last Dynasty International. Perfect place where no one's going to come prying, and they can bring in their imports from other places into New York for their research. Or potentially it's a place where one of the Arisen keeps their tomb.
Yeah, could be. Very interesting stuff. I think I'm spent on ideas, so
I can't think of anything for Changeling. All the other ones we've had previously are really easy for Changeling. This one is doesn't quite. I don't think quite works as well for Changeling.
Well, for Changeling the Dreaming, obviously a Sluagh will want to hang out there and talk to the dead.
Yeah, I think you could possibly say it's a good place for the court of Winter and a grave white changeling or darklings in general to live.
What if there's for Changeling the Lost, there's a Trod that exists on this island, but it doesn't take someone out onto the surface. It puts them in one of those mass graves, and they have to claw their way out.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. So they come out into a hedge that's literally, before they get into the mass grave, the hedge they go through, due to the psychoactive nature of the hedge, is a hedge made of bones.
Yeah. Nice.
Cool. Yeah, that's a really cool one, though. And it's quite interesting because you didn't quite get into it. There's a lot of presumed stuff to do with how it's haunted, but there's no specific stories of any particular hauntings, are there?
Nope. Not really.
Yeah.
And there's also some really funky Google comments on it. Like, this is a great place to drop off a body.
Yeah, but talking about ghouls, you could also look at it being a location for slashers, for Hunter the Vigil. So one of those ex-inmates who's gone back there and still exists in one of the buildings, doing what they do. And as time's gone on, they're becoming even more crazy and mad, and it's slowly unlocking their supernatural abilities. Because that's one of the cool things about Slasher is, as a book for Hunter the Vigil, it focuses on the true horror that humans can commit without actually having any supernatural powers. But obviously, as a person gets more mad and more psychotic and more crazy, they almost have supernatural kind of abilities. So we're talking like the classic Mike Myers. You shoot him and he just keeps getting up. So you could play into that sense that there is some madman on the island.
Very good stuff. All right, Chris, I think we should move on over to the new World of Darkness segment.
Oh, yes.
World of Darkness 2.0.
So, the Underworld of the New World of Darkness is, as we said, is quite a different beast to the Underworld of Classic World of Darkness. So, I'm going to start with how you get there. We've already mentioned something known as Avernian Gates. So, Avernian Gates, when, what, where, and how. So, these are gateways that give you access to the Underworld. They can allow you to go to different parts of the Underworld, so you can go into deeper areas. Some gates lead you into deeper parts of the Underworld than others. When I say deeper, it means really how, in a metaphysical sense, how more separated that realm of the dead is from the realm of the living. Now, these gateways swing both ways, so obviously if you open it, things can get back out. And they have to be opened using keys, which are particular rituals, and each gate can have a specific ritual. So to creatures, entities like sin eaters, mages, or vampires, or bone shadows, or certain Prometheans, and so forth and so forth, these rituals are quite important information to keep on you and to trade even. So those are Avernian gates, and as I said, they lead you into the Autothonian depths, which are kind of like tunnels that you travel through, which have some reflection of the real world. But they aren't the only way to get into the Underworld. There are other ways. Obviously, mages who command the power of death and spirit can quite literally rip a hole into the Underworld, and they're pretty good at doing that. Though I'd like to see them do that and not get hit by paradox. But there are other gates. There are graveyard gates. Now, these are not the same as Avernian gates. Graveyard gates exist in every graveyard, but they are different. These gates are opposed to the very nature of life, and they open at times. They actually open on their own accord at particular times in order to balance the death energy that is gathered in the graveyard. So, If a graveyard has mortal living visitors every so often who go to graves to remember their dead relatives and attend to the gardens and so forth, then the graveyard will have its death energy balanced out naturally. But if people don't go and they forget about it, and more people are interred in the graveyard, then that death energy builds up and builds up and builds up. And the only way to balance it is for the gate to open up and to lure a living person in, to lure that person into their death. And so in return, the death energy is balanced out.
Whoa.
Yeah. Pretty mental, hey?
Yeah.
Now, graveyard gates can also be opened at other times, and the only way it can be opened is with a blood sacrifice. You don't need too much blood, but it has to be mortal blood. So, Vitae, not going to help you. The blood of a werewolf, not going to happen. Promethean, Changeling, nope. So you're going to have to find someone to give you some blood, fresh blood.
Do mages work?
Yeah, because they're still technically mortal.
Okay, cool.
Obviously, because they're for all intents and purposes, are mortal. So yeah, these gates are very different to Wyvernian gates. The other cool thing is that if you have a strong enough feeling of love, like Orpheus did, or a strong enough need for vengeance, even that emotion can open these gates. So if you love someone and you can't deal with being separated from your loved one, you can, and it's strong enough, it could, very rarely, it could open a gate to the underworld and let you go in. So that's a really good, starting point for any World of Darkness Mortals game. The other cool thing, I say other cool thing, is botched exorcisms. So a botched exorcism is when you try and perform an exorcism on a person and you think they are possessed by a ghost, because obviously you want to send the ghost back to the underworld, right? Well, a botched exorcism obviously occurs if you try the exorcism and what they're being possessed by is not a ghost, say by a spirit, or by a demon from the Inferno, or by say a spirit from the abyss, such as in Mage, or any manner of other spiritual entity that's not a ghost. If you do that, then there's a chance that you could actually open a yawning maw that will suck you into the underworld.
Does it do that because, of course, there's no ghost to drag in, so it has to drag in something else, some different soul?
It has to drag in something else to balance out the death energy.
Interesting.
So, as I said, these gates and doors open to different places, and there's upper and lower parts of the underworld. So the upper part of the underworld allows a portion of culture bleed. Sometimes it's more recent stuff, sometimes it's a culture bleed from a different time period of that city. So for example, Iraq, you could say in Iraq, Baghdad, you would maybe think that the culture bleed would be more reminiscent of modern Baghdad, but it may actually, the culture bleed may be more akin to ancient Persia. And that means the tunnels, because the underworld is always these tunnels, is festooned with the walls have built into them, say, glowing fungus, bits of certain coffins and skeletons, or there are grave goods from people that have been buried, and there's examples of those, or there's like candles or other things that provide some sort of light. And of course the tunnels undulate and go up and down and go vertical, or sometimes you have to scrabble up them. Sometimes there's water, and because they're tunnels, the other important thing is quite a lot of Avernian gates often occur in. You will find an Avernian gate somewhere that is underground in the real world. So there's this parallel. There's a parallel between the fact that you're deep underground, or you're somewhere, almost far underground, or under lots of buildings, that leads into the tunnels of the underworld. So that's where the parallel is drawn between our world and that world. And these upper parts are known as the Autochthonious depths. And so normally you find wandering around these tunnels are the recent dead, and they look pale. They look like greyish, whitish, paled versions of what they were in life. Maybe they have the scars of the way they died, and they're very physical people. So the ghosts are solid things now, and there are winding set of tunnels, which is why you get a particular skill like spelunking is an important skill in World of Darkness if you're going into the Underworld.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are other things you can come across when you're going through these tunnels. As I said, there's grave goods, funerary echoes. You will also sometimes come across gates. These gates will allow you access to other areas of the Underworld, deeper parts of the Underworld, and they require a sacrifice. These gates are important because they allow you to get to deeper parts of the Underworld if you're not a Sin Eater. So a Sin Eater has a specific attribute known as psyche, and that's normally what allows them to pass into the deeper areas quite happily. If you're a vampire, you ain't going to do it because you don't have this innate tie to the Underworld. So you have to leave a sacrifice, and this normally is kind of like the pound of flesh type of sacrifice. So this may mean, even for a mortal character or a mage or something, you might actually have to cut off a limb and leave it hanging on a rusty hook there and go off through the gateway. Or you leave a sacrifice from someone else that you've dragged along with you, if you're that kind of bastard. Now, the thing is, when you come back, that sacrifice you can reattach to yourself. Mystically, it will just reattach. You've just got to hope it's still there, because what's to say someone's not nicked off with your sacrifice?
Nice.
Which is also pretty bad, because if they've nicked off, they've stolen it, you're not going to go back through the gateway.
Right.
Yeah. So the other ways, as I said, to get deeper into the Underworld is you cross some of the rivers of the Underworld. And this requires a certain psyche level and a payment to the ferryman. So these are generic ferrymen like Charon who take you across and deeper into the Underworld. And there are a number of these rivers. So I'm just going to list off a few from the Geist of Sanitas book. So rivers in the Underworld, in the Great Below. So the Underworld generally is termed the Great Below in Geist of Sanita. You have the River of Blood, known as Ki or Mal, and that's exactly what it says. It's a river of blood. You gain certain bonuses and penalties when you drink from it. And that's the same for most of these rivers. There's the River of Bone Dust, an ancient god for which this river is named, because it's named Hunstu, was said to have has his body intertwined with a cocoa tree, and so this river floats with the grimy veneer of frothing bone dust. There's the River of Consumption, the Idkura, which is the man-eaten river, and so it's if you take a gulp from it, you're more in tune with the ghosts that you encounter, and so you can talk to them more easily. There's the River of Dead Seed, which is brackish bog water. There's the River of Fire, which is a boiling river glowing with a faint orange pulse. It's not actually a flame, but it appears so. There's the River of Hate, or the River Styx, which is nothing more than swiftly moving water in churning rapids. And if you drink from it, a drink from it, though, attacks the mind with visions of hate and revenge and anger. There's the River of Lamentation, the River of Regret, the River of Memory. I've used this one in Changeling. So I had a player drink from the River of Memory, and it allowed them to remember things from their time of their childhood and when they got stolen away by one of the Fae. The River of Pus, speaks for itself. Sickly mushrooms that flicker and hiss grow at the edges of it. The River of Scorpions, the River of Woe. And so as you cross these rivers, you get further and further into the Underworld. And there's no particular order of which of the rivers you'll cross to get deeper into the Underworld.
Gotcha.
And there's a few more in Book of the Dead. I'm just going to list off. Because there's just it's just such a crazy collection of rivers. If I can find it. Oh, here we go. River of Amber, River of Fate, River of Ice. Some of these have got Viking names, River of Gold, River of Life. So that gets you deeper into the underworld, and gets you into what's known as the lower mysteries and the domains. So obviously the River of Blood, if you're a vampire, you can drink from it, which is really great.
Yeah. I just want to say, before we move on, that a cool little piece of flavor you could do with the River of Consumption, for example, is to, after a character drinks from it and they become more in tune with the dead around them, give them the symptoms of tuberculosis, which would be them coughing up blood and being quite pale, just like the ghosts around them. That could be a fun little thing to play with.
Exactly. The other things that you find in the underworld, which are quite weird, and I've used this before, is a tableau. So a tableau is a scene of repetitive imagery. So it's an echo you can think of, but the ghosts involved in it don't know they're echoing, and so it just carries on and on and on. And they're strange sights, and they have particular participants, a particular repetition, and imagery. And so they represent a particular shocking scene of death or of futility or of entropy. But the fact is that if you can push past what you see, as shocking an image as it is, you will gain greater wisdom of what the meaning of death is. So it's kind of like a physical manifestation of a meaning of a form of death, or the meaning of death. And again, Book of the Dead gives some examples of tableaus, because they're aligned to a particular vice. One I've used is the Congregation of the Doctrine of the False Faith. So you see this tableau, which is like this huge vaulted ceilings, like a cathedral, and there's this twisted, ghastly, ghostly choir singing hymns, and people constantly praying and kowtowing before this priest. And there's a warning within this about professing faith falsely. And so that's the type of thing you can use. You could use these then to really to maybe make a point when a character has been doing certain bad things in the game. You can really kind of drive home what their vice and what their sin may well lead them to, which is kind of useful. So that's tableaus, and yeah, I mean that's the underworld, and that really brings us then to domains and the other things down in the underworld. Mm-hmm. So domains are basically how the lower parts of the underworld are divided up. So tunnels, again, you've got winding tunnels that open into larger, expansive tunnels or networks of tunnels. The domains have a particular theme and mood, you can basically say. So like some of these places represent maybe a particular form of underworld from a religion, or maybe they represent, again, a particular concept of death. One, for example, represents where lots of dead from numerous wars have gathered, and so you see the dead from World War One, World War Two, and often the ghosts here now are far more deformed by their time of being in the underworld, so they take on more nightmarish proportions because they've existed in the underworld for so long. Almost becoming more and more of a reflection of the death that occurred to them, like the meaning of the death that occurred to them, rather than the physical death that happened. And these realms are lorded over by the Keraboi, who are basically spiritual kind of, I would guess, kind of very similar to psychopomps, but they're kind of more like, again, they're not really ghosts. They're ghosts that have transcended death and become a reflection of a form of death, a meaning of death. And they look after and they control their realms and ensure that the old laws are maintained in their realms. So the old laws are literally a set of rules that tell you what you can and can't do in those realms. And again, in the Book of the Dead, there's a number of examples of these domains and some of the rules. So, for example, one is called Lowgate Prison, and it's exactly that. It's a prison and filled with the dead from prisons and so forth. And You've got screaming, literally cell blocks filled with people screaming, and numerous old laws such as the guilty shall submit, freedom must be earned, violence begets violence, all within a subject to the laws, and you have the strange geography. So again, you've got the geography of these domains can be quite massive, really, in proportion to the other parts of the underworld. And then finally, there is oblivion of some form as you go deeper and deeper into the underworld. But normally, if someone's gone that far, you don't hear from them again. And the other important thing, which is good about the Book of the Dead for New World of Darkness, is that while it looks like it's a wonderful book for Geist Sin Eater, it's got a wonderful chapter on how all other entities in the New World of Darkness interact with it. So obviously vampires, it talks about, have actually quite an easy time in the underworld to some respects. They don't spend blood as much because obviously the sun doesn't set nor rise, so they don't have to spend blood every night, every day that passes. But of course feeding is a little difficult because you can't really drain blood from a ghost. So vampires have to find the river of blood, or they have to stand under stalagmites and stand there for almost a good 10 minutes or more, waiting for blood to slowly trickle down from the living world into the underworld and into their mouths.
Whoa, interesting.
Yeah. Though there is an entire discipline in that book, which is a discipline devoted to manipulating the dead, and of course that eventually allows you to consume ghosts and thus feed from ghosts. And the interesting thing is how repulsive the act of feeding on a ghost is, and how very similar it is to diablerie. Obviously, don't use Spirit's Touch as the Auspex power in the Underworld, because there are so many memories there, it will drive you fucking insane. So, yeah. Also, vampires, not being alive and not being dead, fall into a grey area with the old laws, because the old laws apply to the dead. Yeah. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with the vampires. Werewolves, obviously, there are some gates into the underworld that exist in the Hissel. And these shadow gates have no keys, so you can quite easily wander into the underworld. Some werewolves go in thinking they're not in the underworld, and suddenly it's like, oh, actually, this is not the shadow we're in anymore. The interesting thing is this: werewolves don't find ghostly versions of themselves down there, because their soul is already spoken for, which is a very interesting line in the Book of the Dead. So that says something a lot about the cosmology of World of Darkness and the nature of the soul of a werewolf, that it's this mishmash of mortal and werewolf, and wolf. Obviously there's special rights tied to the underworld. The Bone Shadows are very good with dealing with those, and werewolves can consume ghosts like a person, but again, it erodes harmony. Totems, when they enter the underworld, so totems are the spirits for a pack, they become solid and can no longer go incorporeal, which is very interesting. And of course, the moon does not shine here, so you can't regain essence that way. So the only way to get back essence while you're in the underworld is feeding on the dead. Mages, obviously death magic is a lot easier down there. Fate can change the old laws and break them. Spirit and death magic, of course, is very useful for mages for affecting Geists and Caraboi. Prometheans are really interesting when we get to this. Prometheans can get to the underworld in a very unique way. So when a Promethean dies for the first time in their mockery of life that they have, rather than waking up 24 hours later, they can instead wake up on the shores of the rivers, or of one of the rivers of death. And this can actually, you can use this as an important milestone in their pilgrimage. And again, they fall into a grey area with regard to the old laws, because they're, again, a mockery of life made from the body parts of the dead.
So, wait a minute, hold on a second. So, you're saying a Promethean in his physical form will appear next to a river of death? Because they don't have a soul to speak of, so it might be difficult for them to be in the underworld in an incorporeal fashion.
I would say that it's I would say that for some reason they take on a corporeal form formed of their Azoth. Because of the way that because of the way the Prometheans are, they're very tight. They're tied to death, and they're able to sidestep it. So, I think the way you can say is that Azoth, they have. Remember what we said about souls. That a Promethean has the germ of a soul that's ready to be kind of fully formed,
Right.
and going down their pilgrimage will form a true soul. So, they will form a physical thing. Obviously, I think when they escape the underworld and get back into the real world, I would imagine that they would have to travel through the world back to their body, but in twilight. So that's a good point, just on a side note. You know how you were saying about the Shadowlands in Classic World of Darkness? And obviously ghosts can look from the Shadowlands into the real world.
Right.
In New World of Darkness, we don't have that. If a ghost is wanting to interact with the real world, he has to come into the real world, but he can exist in a state known as twilight. So it's kind of like being out of phase with the real world. So you're incorporeal, you can regenerate essence if you go back to your fetters and anchors, and you can exist there without being harmed or seen by mortals and other creatures, unless, of course, they look into twilight. And obviously, all other spiritual entities can exist in twilight, not just ghosts. And then finally, changelings. There are gates in the hedge, and maybe a place like the Crypt of Mary. You know, the children of the Children of Thorns from Dance Macabre for Vampire the Requiem, which is So maybe her tomb, which the vampires go into and then come back out changed, is actually a gateway is a gateway within the hedge, which leads into the underworld. Anyway, that's interesting. Contracts, of course, are slightly altered in the underworld. Also, and here's the really interesting thing: when you enter the underworld, you immediately, changelings can, for the first time they go into the underworld, can spend a willpower point and enter into the death clause. This is very important. It gives the changeling a free death, so they can die in the underworld and immediately come back to life. Now, this is very important because it says something about the relationship between fey creatures and the underworld, and that the fact that if this clause exists, it means that the fey themselves have a clause with the underworld. They have a pact with death, and this means that if there's a pact, there's a loophole. And so this means that it would basically be a very revelationary thing to changelings, because it would mean, well, if the Fae have made a pact with death and there's a loophole, then that means there's actually a very specific way to kill one of the gentry.
Just gotta find out. That is an amazing plot hook right there.
I've used that one. I literally did that, and I went, you've entered the death clause, and one of the players went, hold on a minute, does that mean the gentry can actually die? And I was like, I don't know. He goes, So, yeah, that's really cool. And obviously, the other elephant in the room, we've got two elephants in the room, actually, with this one. First of all, how does the underworld of New World of Darkness relate to the supernal realm of Stygia from Mage? Well, it's a very, very grey area. I would say that the supernal realm of Stygia represents the purest, truest concept of the principle of death, whereas the underworld is the reality of death, the fallen reflection of Stygia itself. And the other thing is, which group have we not talked about, Mike? I think we've not talked about mummies.
We have not. We also haven't talked about demons, but...
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I would say with mummies, the thing that we spoke about when we did our mummy crossover thing is is the idea that maybe there is a domain very well hidden, bordered by certain mountains, which is where the dead, the gods of the Arisen exist, and obviously no other ghosts. No Sin Eaters have made it there because it's very well protected by the powerful, the very powerful geomantic energies that have been drawn into it, and by the energies recovered from the relics that the Arisen bring into that realm with them. So, yeah, there's a massive plot hook idea of a bunch of mages going to the underworld to find a way to get to this realm of the dead to steal a relic of the Arisen.
Or kill a mummy, because that's
Or
where they
kill a
are
mummy.
weakest and most defenseless. But one of the interesting things is that, so if this were a domain, this underworld where the judges of Duat inhabit, and where the mummies go when they are torpid, it's not like the other domains. It's not a tunnel like the regular underworld, and it's really this broad, expansive land. It's quite different than anything else we've seen in the underworld.
It is really different, as in, yeah, as you say, it's got mountains and it's got a sky and it's a desert land, and it has their kingdom there for the Duat and the gods of the Duat. So where it sits in relation to the underworld and the hedge and everything else is, crazy. I mean, I think that's one of the nice things about New World of Darkness is the cosmology. While you can see things how they can link together, it doesn't neatly match up. So you've got lots of room to fill in the gaps as you see fit. The other thing that would be interesting with these realms is I wonder how even creatures like the Strix would interact with it, because they're spirits that interact with a form of dead. So there's something to be said there. Again, there's particular bloodlines which of Meket which have access to the discipline that allows them to manipulate the dead. Again, you could take inspiration from the Giovanni from Classic World of Darkness and make them Meket. You've got the Burakarmin from Vampire Requiem, who are necromancers. So again, they may be able to access a no-way Avernian gates that get them into a more Eastern Asia reflection underworld that they go into to do some literal ancestor worship. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it, and I mean, I've really only just given brief things from the Book of the Dead. Like, there's tons of ghosts in there, Caraboy, powers. Obviously, in Hunter, you've got groups that may well want to go in there for whatever reason. You can also imagine World of Darkness slasher again. You could have a slasher that for some reason knows how to open Avernian gates, and that's how he goes about to commit his crimes. That's pretty much it. Yeah. Any last thoughts on that stuff?
Oh, definitely. Well, here's one. So what if the judges of Duat in Mummy the Curse are actually Caraboy, or not too far removed themselves? Actually, wait, did you come up with the idea like a while back and I just stole it just now?
I think we did say that when we talked about that.
Whoops.
But
here's something. All right, what's up?
I was going to say, it's interesting when we look at how Prometheans are able to get their first death and go into the underworld, because again, that's quite a mirror to the mummies. And we've said this again, that Prometheans and mummies seem really similar.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. Now, one thing we haven't discussed on the show before, and I know this for a fact, is Demon the Descent. I almost said Demon the Curse. Demon the Descent. So we did ask Rose and Matt a little fun fact, a little tidbit about demons, and that is whether or not they have a soul. And to quote Matt McFarland, or paraphrase, he said, well, they don't have a soul like you'd normally think about it. So how will they interact with the underworld? How are they going to be different? It would seem to me that the God Machine might need to send angels, for example, into the underworld. But how might they change, and how will the demons themselves be affected?
That's really interesting, yeah.
It's something to ponder.
And also I doubt there'd be any... Yeah, when a demon takes on a new cover and it eliminates a person from reality in order to take their life to be its cover, I doubt that act leaves behind a ghost of that person. Yes.
Or maybe it does, and it's going to be quite dangerous for that demon or angel to enter the underworld, because that ghost might be hunting for him.
Very, very true. Um, yeah, and of course, one of the other entities that exist in the underworld is geists. These spirit ghost thing, which obviously possess sin eaters and merge with their souls together. Um, but yeah, I really like the underworld in New World of Darkness. Like one of the domains is like a massive, like you come out onto this huge cavern and you can barely see the top of it. And you can barely see the other sides of it because you're onto a beach and it leads onto this dark ocean. And again, you can draw some parallel between, say, the Tempest of Classic World of Darkness and use that as inspiration for a domain in New World of Darkness. So you've got this, roiling sea, and there's some black ship manned by the dead that are ready to sail across it for whatever reason. The other thing is, how far into the underworld do you need to go in order to find reincarnation, maybe? Is there a way to find reincarnation? Is there not? One of the classic things, and this is why, Mike, we really need to do the Vampire the Requiem, Requiem for the Dark Ages, is because there's a really, really cool Avernian gate we need to cover.
Okay.
And I'm gonna basically do the big spoiler for it and why I want to do Requiem for the Dark Ages. So one of these Avernian gates is located in Constantinople.
Perfect.
And it's written about in Book of the Dead. I'm just paging through to get to it. There we go. So this Avernian Gate, you've got there's some stuff written by one of the servants or bodyguards to the Doge Dandolo, who was the Doge who led the forces of the Catholic world and of Venice to Constantinople, because he got blinded when he was a merchant kind of diplomat in Constantinople, so he wanted some revenge, and he was now Doge. Mm-hmm. And so you've got all this you can read through. It's one of these classic kind of in character artifacts that you can read through. And the story hook here is the main what would have been a cathedral, but was changed by the Turks into a mosque, is the mosque of Hagia Sophia.
Yes.
Yes. Under that is an Avernian gate. And this Avernian gate is obviously being accessed, and it was accessed by the Doge when he invaded Constantinople. So it's the idea, did they go there to go into this Avernian gate to get something from the bit of the underworld that this gate opens into? So those aware of the legend say this gateway leads to hell or Sheol, and that there's spirits and demons down there. Either way, the lip of the pit is lined with priceless treasures, and some of these mementos are engraved with a very old language. It uses, in big terms, a very old language. So put in there Atlantean, or the language of the Nameless Empire, or whatever ancient society you'd like to use. Some versions of the story even posit that the Holy Grail itself is hidden among the other antiquities. So, Mike, what other ancient holy relic could we think that could be hidden amongst these antiquities? A piece of the cross? Or maybe it fell into the underworld and somehow got there is the Spear of Destiny, which, of course, the Monachus and the Lancashire Sanctum at one point did have until the Black Abbey burnt down. Now, one of the terrors of this Avernian Gate is that there's a huge, the only way to describe it is a huge spider that lurks there in wait, guarding these treasures, and obviously numerous dead and ghosts caught in its web. and there's a prophecy associated with it, and there's just this chance to recover lost artifacts, and yeah, that's kind of you could use that in a very more modern context where you've got sin eaters or a group of mages or some vampires that go to Constantinople to find the Severnian Gate, or in the context of the fall of Constantinople, that classic book for Vampire the Dark Ages. Well, let's just take that as a starting point, and let's kind of just change some of the reasoning of why the forces of Venice and of the Catholic world went to
Yeah.
Constantinople.
Yeah, those Giovanni in Venice, maybe that's why they went there.
Well, let's just
Get
change
to,
around. Let's think you've got maybe you've got some of the Lancashire Sanctum and part of the Nux, what was it, Nux, right? The knightly empire, the forerunners of the Invictus, and they wish to go to Constantinople to have some revenge against those who they see as heretics to the true teachings of Longinus, and to recover the lost Spear of Destiny.
I like it. Chris, we're doing this next episode.
Are we finally going to go through my notes on Requiem for the Dark Ages?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's make it a full Darker Days episode.
Okay, cool.
Come up with a little C-Wad. Do the N-Wad. We'll be good.
That one, I think that one will be good for N-Wad because it won't take too long to go over. We can keep C-Wad for Technocracy, and finally look at the Progenitors book, and finally look at the Syndicate book.
Yeah, sure thing. I think our potential, probable, almost basically definite new host would be pretty into that. So, should be good. All right, I think that's just about it for this episode of Darker Days Radio. Chris, do you have any other notes or messages?
I want to say a big thank you to Beasts of War. So that's www.beastsofwar.com. They are a podcasting YouTube, well, they're a YouTubing channel that do a lot of wargaming stuff. And they are the guys who I won my copy of Box Game of Hordes off. So a big thank you to them because they give away stuff all the time. And I've told them about our podcast, so I hope they'll listen to this one and give us a shout out in return, because they cover a bit of roleplay info sometimes, but yeah, nothing World of Darkness wise. So yeah, big thank you to them. Any other things? We've got quite a lot of stuff in our Drive-Thru RPG credit, which we're keeping ready for a certain new books to give away as prizes. So as we get closer to that, we will arrange that. Any Darklings that we have planned coming up?
No, because we just downgraded upgraded the Dark Ages 1 to full episode content.
We need to at some point snag Doug Seacat, and we're going to need to snag Simon again to talk on Hello Metropolis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So, yeah, what's up? We're Darker Days Radio. Check us out at darker-days.org. We're, of course, on Facebook, facebook.com/darkerdaysradio. And, of course, we have our G+ community. That's where all the action happens. That's where we talk about a lot of stuff. In fact, a recent conversation, Chris, was about The Void, which might be a little interesting to check out. Hopefully it's a little bit less... I don't know, questionable than Cthulhu Tech, but...
yeah, and it's got less dodgy dice pulls and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that's it's pretty cool coming up.
It's a bit more hard sci-fi, isn't it?
I would say hard sci-fi in quotations because, it's a bunch of dudes that don't know science, I don't think.
It's more I was going to say it from my cursory glance at it and what I know of it, it's more to the end of it's more Event Horizon than Guyver.
I'd say it's more
Evangelion.
It's Mass Effect.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
It's
as
Mass
well.
Effect against Cthulhu, pretty much, with no space aliens.
No Chaos Space Marines.
Nope, none of those either.
Good.
Awesome. Cool. And of course, we have our Twitter account at Dark Days Radio, and then we're also on Tumblr, right, Chris?
Yeah, when I post stuff, I post some pictures and stuff because Onyx Path have a Tumblr that they do stuff on. It's amazing the amount of people you come across on Tumblr that go, "Oh, I wish people would still play World of Darkness." It's like we are. So the sky is always falling when people talk about World of Darkness. And yeah, I mean, also Sam, she's been posting up on her blog film reviews. What was the last one that went up? Jennifer's Body, and I think before that was Evil Dead, the original. I don't know whether she's going to write a review for Evil Dead: Army of Darkness. Which
She
is
totally
great.
should.
You've been told you should. Mike says you should. I don't know what's next on our horror film. We'll see what's. Oh no, maybe a good review. We watched recently Hannibal Rising. So that might be good as a good talking point with relation to what we were saying about slashers in World of Darkness. Because sometimes the most horrific thing in the world, the most horrifying thing, are committed just by normal people.
Absolutely. You two should watch May, M-A-Y. It's a
Okay.
really nice, it's like a rom-com.
Okay. Oh, on wadnews.net, I often post up some blog posts. So I recently wrote up a blog post along the lines of what we talked about with Simon, which is keeping things mundane so that you emphasize the horror. So, in other words, why the horror will sometimes disappear if you keep playing superheroes with fangs. Yeah. So obviously, wadnews.net, they have some news there. Sometimes I think they should be recording their Google Plus Hangout tomorrow evening.
Last weekend?
No, they didn't,
What?
because Pete had a technical failure. So people aren't going to know this because this is going to go out after that show thing. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, go find the latest wadnews.net podcast, because there's going to be some talk about how you basic considerations and ideas about how you get pen and paper games into a computer game, which is very
Sweet.
which it seems to be a topic of interest, not only with regard to World of Darkness, but also War Machine. So yeah, cool.
Awesome. All right, that's it for this episode of Dark Days Radio. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. And
Thank you.
yeah, good night.
Good night.